I have breaking news. We've finally been waiting for this. Malyuk's response for Kiev. All of Moscow is on fire. Terrorist attacks in the Moscow metro, terrorist attacks in the Russian capital. Moreover, Shoigu has most likely been eliminated.
This is our regular segment, friends, Sasha plus Sasha. Let's get started. Top analyst Alexander Demchenko. Sasha, welcome.
Hello, Sasha. Hello, glad to see everyone.
Friends, please like this video and write in the comments what you think about it. Let's get started.
Putin is afraid for his life. Putin doesn't even dream of death. He's afraid to even think about it. Putin understands perfectly well that this is the end for him. In other words, he's next. And someone will come for him. Do you really think Putin doesn't have traitors around him? I'm more than sure that half of the Kremlin is working for the CIA. He already has a bunch of bodyguards who betrayed him a long time ago. They've given up all the coordinates, all his bunkers, all his secret and non-secret residences, all his apartments, all his meeting spots with mistresses. Absolutely everyone knows everything. Even without satellites, without Starlinks from the traitor Musk. So they know everything. You asked me off camera, Sasha, who will betray Vladimir Putin? I said, his chief bodyguard, the one close to his daughter. Well, I'm exaggerating a bit, maybe. Tayumin. The man he elevated. The man he put in charge of the entire Russian defense industry. The man responsible for all of Russia's border regions. The man who oversees the FSB and a number of other agencies responsible for protecting the so-called border regions. Putin's favorite chief bodyguard, Dyumin. He has already buried his former favorite, the head of the Ministry of Emergency Situations. That one tried to stage a coup and Putin buried him. He went into the mountains, died accidentally, was holding the cameraman's hand, and they both fell off the mountain together. That's it, the end. So I think Putin is very worried about this, about the fact that he could also be eliminated. Even like a domino effect, everything could collapse. This whole line will collapse one after another. Putin, and from there, it's not far to Kim Jong-un and all the other comrades, both in uniform and without. You understand? Shoigu and Gerasimov are just sitting there thinking, damn, this is a nightmare. They're not afraid because they're waiting for a response from Kim Liuk. Not because they're waiting for a response from Kim Liuk. They understand perfectly well, they even understand perfectly well that Putin could send the same kind of little drone or scooter or something else to them. Shoigu walks around completely frightened. It's cold and lonely for him at the top. He told all of us about it. On the air of Russia 1, he said it's cold and lonely at the top. He's afraid. He now walks around Moscow with 14 bodyguards, barely moves around the Russian capital. He's been completely stripped of everything. Do you think he's not worried that Putin will eliminate him? He knows that Putin will eliminate him. He knows that Putin will dispose of him. At the most inconvenient moment for Shoigu, and he's afraid of that. Gerasimov is afraid. They're all afraid. And Solovyov, who says there will be an evacuation. Get ready, Kyiv. Get ready. Kharkiv, Odessa, Sumy, prepare for evacuation. We're just getting started. I don't know where Vladimir Solovyov will be evacuated to which Sharashka, to which prison, but I do know for sure that very soon the third phase of the special military operation will begin, carried out by Vasyl Malyuk and the Security Service of Ukraine. And it will be Moscow that has to be evacuated, not Kyiv. And in Moscow, I just don't know what they'll even use to shoot down those drones. Maybe they've already rigged GUM, or maybe they've already rigged the Cathedral of Christ the Savior, or maybe the Moscow metro will go up in fireworks for them. Putin has carried out terrorist attacks in the Moscow metro 4 times. What, do we really think they won't bomb the Moscow metro again? All of this has already been done by these Russian comrades. First, so many of these terrorist attacks, they will stage themselves. And second, the SBU really is preparing. And not only that, there's also military intelligence, Budanov, Malyuk. In short, they're preparing a whole series of surprises for him. It's all symbolic for him. He's really afraid for his own skin. These days, he's really lost his mind. By the way, we also saw Prigozhin in Israel. You saw those photos, right?
I saw them too. And yes, here's the question. Was that really Prigozhin? And what was he doing in Israel? Right away, such a...
No, but that's clearly not Prigozhin, the one who was killed. A man who looks 100% like the late Prigozhin is standing right there on TV, just standing there. But I can just imagine when they showed Putin that photo, just imagine. Peskov brings it in, or someone else brings it in and says, look, Prigozhin is alive in Tel Aviv. Can you imagine? He probably would have had a stroke or a heart attack right on the spot. Everyone was already saying his heart wasn't doing well. I can't even imagine what would have happened to him if they had shown him, if he had seen this living Prigozhin. Everyone was saying his heart was already bad. I can't imagine what would have happened to him if he had seen this living Prigozhin. I actually think that if you showed him Prigozhin every single day, the end of the war, the end of the fighting against Ukraine would come much sooner.
Sasha, as I understand it, Rostek's Murzagalov told me that Putin gave the order to Shoigu and Shoigu carried it all out. Regarding
whom?
He carried it out at the command post against Prigozhin. So Shoigu was personally at the command post giving the order for liquidation specifically for the strike on the plane. And then immediately Putin had a question for Shoigu. Did he carry out his order?
I don't know what exactly Shoigu was supposed to carry out there. Shoigu, together with Gerasimov, killed him. Because of Gerasimov, they were fleeing from the southern central military district from Rostov. Because they sent their negotiators to Prigozhin, but Prigozhin sent them away, or rather, he didn't exactly send them away. He just spoke to them politely, since it turned out these negotiators were also funding Prigozhin. The problem lies elsewhere. Patrushev eliminated Prigozhin in the sky over Russia. And he did it. And it's not me saying this, but an investigation by the Wall Street Journal. So I don't know about the speculations of certain individuals, but I am more than... We already know this from the investigation where it was clearly proven how it all happened according to Shagov. By the way, notice, where is Patrushev? All the people who were involved in this affair with Prigozhin, or were his enemies, like Shoigu, like Gerasimov, or people who tried to help him but then lost their way, went through the wrong door, like Ramzan Kadyrov, or people who eliminated Prigozhin, like Patrushev, they are all gone. They have been politically disposed of. And some, who actively helped by closing the skies over Russia, like General Surovikin, were kept in a basement, had their ribs and teeth, their liver beaten, and barely survived. And now he is in Africa, laying flowers at some kind of African eternal flame near the embassy of the Russian Federation. And General Spartak was imprisoned. And all those who supported the so-called Gherkin, or Gherkin himself, like you said, some assistant of Gherkin was imprisoned. Yes, another one sent to prison. Well, Gherkin's fate is unenviable. I suspect that Gherkin will be eliminated in the near future. Listen, Putin doesn't need all these extra people in the Russian Federation right now. He fully understands that a black swan with a red crest is just flying over Russia. And he doesn't know what will happen next. He might have major problems on Russia's southern border, and he doesn't have a backup army. Right now, in the Kremlin, they're seriously discussing a new wave of mobilization, because they don't have any money. Reshetnikov told you himself, the Russian Minister of Economy, there's no money, we're in a recession. No money, we can't hold on anymore. That's it, it's over, the end has come. So what now? If there's no money, what's the way out of this situation? Let's just send this cannon fodder for free. Anyway, after 3 weeks we pay, and it turns out, in the ground, it's free. So what should we do? And then there will be a huge commotion, a massive blaze in southern Russia. The whole south will go up in flames. The FSB... The border of the Russian Federation will be breached, there will be a breakthrough, and hundreds of thousands will head toward Moscow. So what should we do? The FSB won't be able to handle it, the checkpoints won't cope, everything will be burning. Well, what are they going to do? Create a second army, but they don't have a second army. Find some forces and resources? They don't have any of that. Everything is at war, everything is here in chaos. Is there any breakthrough here? There is no breakthrough at all. Well, they have nothing. That's it. They're stuck in a swamp. They're bogged down. So what do they do next? Nothing. That's why for him, look, he calls Trump every single day. He calls Trump. Why does he call Trump crying and sniffling? It's like phone sex for them. That's what I call it. It's like phone sex for them. What are they doing? What are they doing at night? He calls him at night, you know. It's like a striptease for the poor. Well, what is he talking about? Every single evening, every single night, he's begging him in tears and snot not to kill, not to do anything about it. And Trump listens to him and says, all right, I'll give you 2 more weeks. Talk to him, talk. All right, fine. I'll step aside for now. All right, fine. Let my aircraft carrier keep heading there for now, the 3rd aircraft carrier. I'll postpone the war, and you keep talking. Call me, Vladimir. I enjoy talking to you at night. And by the way, can you picture this? So Putin calls Trump, they're talking, and at the same time, Trump presses the red button and says, launch the missiles. We're starting a war. Can you imagine that? Right in the middle of a conversation with Putin. That's how you have to deal with him. Strike right in the middle of the conversation, so it's unforgettable, so he sees what that means. Walk out right in the middle of the conversation. Remember how he came out and announced it when he eliminated Soleimani, then al-Baghdadi, members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, military commanders, and took out terrorists? How he came out, and Trump, I remember this was during his first term, there was this viral video comparing him to Barack Obama, who eloquently described what an amazing operation it was, how precisely it was carried out, that this was an enemy of America. And then Trump came out and said, we killed him like a dog. We emptied entire magazines into him, found him, and then finished him off. It was a nightmare what he said.
When we talk about special operations, Malyuk Budanov attacks on Russia's nuclear triad, on the Pacific Fleet, on the Northern Fleet, on Russia's Black Sea Fleet. I remember when Prigozhin was marching on Moscow and began to possibly take control of Russia's nuclear facilities. People started asking him, why aren't you taking control of the nuclear power plants? Why aren't you doing that? So that Prigozhin could use this as leverage against Putin. So if Ukraine starts certain special operations, could this be the beginning of the end for Putin himself, in your opinion? The nuclear triad.
Look, I've already said that if there are one or two more phases of such large-scale special operations, like a web, then Vladimir Putin will have to respond and respond very harshly. But he has nothing to respond with. He's already shown his hand. He won't use nuclear weapons. Unlike Trump. You understand? That one could actually go completely insane and press the red button. Vladimir Putin, not yet. So first of all, second, Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin, he also fully realizes that he has no other means to escalate the situation except for mobilization. All right, so he mobilizes someone. And then what? All these people need to be provided for. All these people need to be supplied with something. So what do we do now? What are we supposed to do with all this? And they don't have a backup. They've hit the ceiling. Kemezov came and said, well, we don't have any more money. The head of Rostec, we don't have any more money, none at all. We don't know what to do, how to provide, or with what to provide. We can make Panzer systems, we can make anti-drone systems to protect you, but we can't cover all of Russia. And as for that cannon fodder you're sending to the front, we don't really care about it, and we don't feel the slightest bit sorry. You've noticed Dasha keeps sending his bodies to Ukraine. I've mentioned this more than once already. He mixes the bodies of Russians with the bodies of Ukrainian servicemen and sends them back here to be buried. So there won't be any images over there. Because they have nowhere to put them. Send them to the families? It's easier to say that they're missing in action. It's easier to say that they're still fighting. It's easier to say that communication is cut off over there. If these bodies start coming back by the millions, hundreds of thousands of bodies, all of Russia will be shocked and explode. He doesn't want that. He remembers all too well the first Chechen war during Yeltsin's time, and the mothers of conscripts and the mothers of the fallen. That was such an uproar. It echoed throughout Moscow, throughout the Kremlin. And Yeltsin gave in back then. But Putin has no intention of giving in to the mothers in that sense. So what, is he going to start shooting and hanging mothers? He might. But then where will all this go next? In what direction? That's why I say, the longer he drags out this whole mess, the more he drives himself into a state of total deadlock. That's the biggest problem for him. Because he's simply heading into a dead end. And there's absolutely no way out of this dead end. Whether Trump helps him or not, there's no way out. That's exactly why right now, against the backdrop, right now, terrible things are happening. Why is he doing this? He's playing along with Trump, showing him, I'm ready for negotiations, I'm ready for Minsk 3, and Trump wants Minsk 3. That's why Lukashenko's trip to Elog happened. That's exactly why. Because most likely Putin is now playing along with Trump and talking about how he's going to speak with Zelensky, that he'll return the children, exchange prisoners of war, return the bodies, and so on. That's exactly why he deliberately, like Cinderella, would show Trump his video, come out to the journalists, and specifically for Trump, while it was daytime for you and nighttime in Beijing, he would talk about how he wants normal cooperation, an end to the war, and communication with Zelensky, and that he's not against ending everything. Why does Trump want Minsk 3? Trump wants a freeze. Putin didn't want it, but probably against the backdrop of Iran, he suddenly wanted this freeze of the military confrontation, the war between Russia and Ukraine. Or maybe he didn't want it, but wanted to stage some kind of scene, some kind of imaginary insinuation. And now Trump has sent Kellogg to Belarus so that Putin would also have some kind of involvement in all of this.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Sasha, regarding Belarus. Indeed, as we discussed, there is a danger, first of all, of an offensive action from Belarus in the fall. Secondly, before the broadcast, we talked about the possibility that missile strikes from the territory of Belarus against Ukraine might resume.
Yes, because right now this is being reported by Belarusian railway workers. This partisan movement, as you know, has been active since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. So these guys are literally reporting. Yesterday you mentioned that entire trains are arriving, and inside these freight trains there are aerial bombs, air-launched munitions, and rocket shells. Moreover, military aircraft are also being brought in. Russian military planes are being transported to the territory of Belarus. So I don't rule out an escalation. I don't rule out maybe not an attempt at an invasion from the north, although even that can't be excluded right now. But at the very least, I don't rule out bombings from the north, targeting Kyiv and other important strategic Ukrainian cities. Because Putin needs this, and maybe Beijing does too. We don't really know how the recent talks between Lukashenko and Xi near Beijing ended. Maybe Beijing also wants this, for Lukashenko to get involved in the war. Lukashenko doesn't want this, and the Americans have probably received some kind of signal from the Belarusians. That's why Trump sent Kellogg, so that Kellogg could observe how NATO countries tried to attack Belarus from 4 directions. But in reality, there's probably only one reason. Further escalation and the opening. Further escalation from Belarus, the threat from Belarus from the perspective of the Baltic countries, the far eastern flank of NATO, and on the other hand, perhaps even escalation from the north if we're talking about the Russian-Ukrainian war. That's precisely why Kellogg is going, and it doesn't matter what maps he looks at. Not because they want to revive Minsk III, although such proposals are probably still being voiced. But after all, Americans are not idiots, no matter how we might feel about what's happening. We need, to remove a bit of the propaganda gloss, because propaganda is coming from all sides. I mean from the American side, from the European side, from the Russian side, of various kinds. But if we strip all that away, it's clear that most likely we're dealing with the fact that the Americans have once again detected some excessive Russian activity on Belarusian territory and want to slap Lukashenko on the wrist to prevent it. Whether they'll succeed or not is another question. Because American intelligence has detected something and they're being helped by partisans who are on the territory of the Belarusian state. That's already apparent. The question is how all this will end. But I've always said that this Belarusian threat, especially now with the upcoming Zapad 2025 exercises, which will officially start in the fall but are already being prepared. So within the framework of these exercises, it's necessary to watch Belarus very closely. And to take absolutely any rustling or movement on the territory of that state very seriously, especially considering that Putin most likely wants to escalate the war and retaliate for Malyuk's special operation. And it's necessary to prepare for these various scenarios. It's better to be over-prepared than to miss something important.
Sasha, a very important point. When we talk about Putin's reputation, there are several scenarios. The first scenario is an overthrow of power from within, meaning a coup d'etat or a military coup.
Here you can't really predict anything. It's like reading tea leaves. There could be completely different scenarios here. Any of these scenarios, the first, the second, or the third, are possible. It's clear that the Americans have certain resources and means to destabilize the situation in Iran from within. Most likely, they have their own agents who are close to Ayatollah Khamenei. After all, it wasn't by chance that they once managed to track down bin Laden. They knew. They approached the right people, and those people gave up the coordinates of bin Laden's location, and he was eliminated.
I'm talking about Putin, not Khamenei, about Putin.
As for Putin, it's clear that, first of all, the Americans have a huge number of their own agents around Vladimir Putin. These are corrupt agents, agents who are in it for the money. That's the first thing. And that's why Putin is afraid and constantly shuffles his deck of bodyguards. Second, it's clear that the Americans know how Putin moves. They have good satellite coverage. They know perfectly well where Putin's various bunkers are and so on. But I think that if we're talking about Putin, the Americans will try to overthrow Vladimir Putin through the internal elite. They will do everything to ensure that there is a coup in Russia in order to change the government immediately. Because they don't want to allow a power vacuum after Putin is eliminated. They need someone to take power immediately. So that, as they see it, Russia doesn't face the threat of disintegration, which would plunge the world into nuclear shock. I don't believe that would plunge the world into nuclear shock. Just as the collapse of the Soviet Union didn't plunge the world into nuclear shock. Nevertheless, the Americans are very afraid of this scenario, just as they were in 1991. And most likely, if they do anything, they'll do it the way they did starting in 1986. Gently nudging the internal elite toward a coup d'etat.
One of Putin's daughters spoke about life extension and these technologies. As I understand it, their goal is to do everything possible to make sure Putin lives as long as possible. But when we talk about the special operation successor in Russia, or about when the elite will change, just recently Putin, for the first time, actually acknowledged the existence of his family, his granddaughter, his daughters. For the first time, he actually said the phrase, my daughter, my granddaughter is studying Chinese, and so on. This is already a kind of preparation for the transition. And do you think that Vladimir Putin's daughter could become the next president of Russia?
No, I don't think so. I don't think Putin is preparing for a transition. I think that Vladimir Putin actually wants to hold on to power for as long as possible. First of all, this isn't the first time he's talked about this daughter and this granddaughter who is studying Chinese, considering that he once gave an interview before the war to Vandenko, by the way, a Ukrainian who I believe works at JASSM. And he has mentioned this repeatedly already. But Dasha, the question is something else entirely. The point is that Vladimir Putin's family is now receiving all the power, absolutely all of it. Absolutely all the power in Russia. We've said more than once already that his younger daughter, Katerina Tikhonova, has gotten absolutely everything. They're now digging into the Central Bank of Russia. They've already taken over the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Energy for themselves. His family, represented by Kabaeva and his best friend Kovalchuk, the Kovalchuk brothers, have also taken over Kurchatov. They've taken over Russia's nuclear industry and all the propaganda in the Russian Federation. In other words, almost everything is now under Putin and his family. The most important security sectors, the most important energy sectors, and so on and so forth. That's why the family's role has increased many times over. It's likely that the family is now involved in appointments. It's only them who decide who gets appointed to various positions. From the perspective of the Russian power vertical, well, the problem is that the Russian elite probably doesn't like this situation. Just as the Russian elite didn't like it when the family was in charge of absolutely everything in Russia. At first, they didn't like that Korzakov was running everything in Russia, the chief bodyguard of Yeltsin, and Korzakov was removed. Then they didn't like that the family was running things together with Yeltsin, and so something came along and removed both the family and Yeltsin. And that's how Putin came to power. And now probably someone won't like that Putin, together with the family, is running everything and has taken control of the common fund. So this will push the internal elite even more toward a split. Everything will explode in Moscow. They're just waiting for another Prigozhin to appear there. A whole bunch of Prigozhins. And this black swan, Putin, keeps creeping closer and closer, nearer and nearer.
Sasha, explain to us, to normal, reasonable people, why Elon Musk is asking for political asylum in Russia. After all, Starlink and Elon Musk are currently working for the Ukrainian armed forces, which is very important. And if he asks for political asylum in Russia, it turns out that our number one enemy is providing us with Starlinks, even if for money. This is even dangerous from a military standpoint. He could hand over all the technology to the Russians, leak all this information.
Well, first of all, he's already doing that together with Pavel Durov. As we know from investigations, they are helping the general staff of the Russian Federation and the Russian army obtain the necessary data. Regarding communications, satellite images related to the Ukrainian army. So he's already working for them anyway. I have only one explanation. Well, it's more of a hypothesis than an explanation. I suspect that Elon Musk slipped up. If he really was working for Russia or cooperating with Russian intelligence, there have been statements to that effect from former FBI employees. They gave them recently. There was literally a leak to the German press. There were a number of interviews where former FBI representatives said that Musk met with Putin, cooperated with Russian intelligence, and that Russian intelligence had approached him. We don't know how successful they were, but maybe he was that very main agent in Trump's circle and in general in America who has now simply disappeared, who was discovered, who they started digging into, and probably found out something about. And frightened, Musk is simply trying to run away, so to speak, to his homeland. From the very beginning, Musk's whole biography is full of obvious inconsistencies. How he made his first millions, how his family was connected to Russia, how his family was connected to the Nazis for a certain period, and so on. Everything there is full of obvious inconsistencies. There are a lot of gaps in this biography. Whether he communicated with Russians or not, what business interests he had regarding the Russian Federation, how many times he spoke with Putin, what they talked about, and so on. Who exactly from Russian intelligence approached him, and in which years? There are a lot of questions for Elon Musk. And if he really felt that the entire American security apparatus, the whole American power structure, started digging into him, he could have gotten scared and calmly asked back home, so to speak, his collective homeland in Moscow, to get him out of the US quickly, saying, I blew my cover, I failed. That's entirely possible too. Can you imagine Musk is actually a Russian illegal agent? That would be a huge scandal. The right hand of the US president, a Russian illegal agent. But if that's the case, it would be the most successful operation by Putin and Russian intelligence in decades.
Yeah, it would be a total disgrace for America. Sasha, as we wrap up, I can't help but ask you about the drones. A military specialist in radio technology, Flash, made a statement that Russia is already producing more than 5,000 Shaheds per month, and that's not even the limit. Next, North Korea is sending 25,000 workers to Russia to produce Shaheds. But this is a very serious challenge for Ukraine's armed forces because in the drone race, unfortunately, Russia is currently winning, and we need to do something about it. I read what military analysts had to say, and everyone said, we're facing a bloody autumn because Putin will simply bombard us with drones and destroy us.
Well, it's obvious that he will bombard us with drones and missiles and try to destroy us. He has no other options because his entire summer campaign will eventually stall. He doesn't have enough forces or resources to capture major Ukrainian cities. We know this perfectly well ourselves. And it's not for nothing that right now Ukrainian military intelligence and the armed forces of Ukraine are relentlessly striking deep into the Russian rear, destroying railways, logistics, and so on and so forth. We've talked about this many times, but I'm not a specialist in drone technologies, the military sphere, or anything like that. I'm not a military analyst or a military expert. But what I do clearly understand is that if Putin brings in 25,000 North Koreans to a factory in Yelabuga, Tatarstan, where the Iranians built him a facility for producing Iranian Shaheds drone systems, it means that Putin actually lacks both drones and the manpower to mass produce these drones, that the plans for drone production in Russia are not being fulfilled. That's why there's help coming from North Korea. Next, what is the second conclusion I come to? I come to the conclusion that Ukraine, without the help of the West and Europe, also won't be able to handle the drone war on its own. This means that Europeans need to speed up, stop dragging their feet, and start churning out drones. They need to start producing drones and sending them en masse, and set up factories on the borders with Ukraine to make it faster. Set them up deep within Ukrainian territory as well to make things even faster. And send a huge number of drones to Kiev and other command centers so that these drones can be launched by the Ukrainian armed forces towards Russia. But another extremely important point is anti-drone systems, which Ukraine desperately needs. The issue here is not only with the Ukrainian defense industry, which is already overwhelmed with orders because obviously things are coming in from all sides, and it's necessary to somehow modernize absolutely everything, create absolutely everything, and completely reformat everything. This is also a question for the West. The West needs to wake up and provide these anti-drone systems. Frankly speaking, Trump really messed things up when he handed over these 20,000 anti-drone systems to Israel. It's clear why. They need them there now too. They were preparing for this attack from Iran. That's it. All these past 2 months. But at the same time, Ukraine remains an important point for Europe. Primarily for Europe, and Europe simply needs to wake up. I think I'm stating some obvious axioms that everyone already understands anyway.
Friends, Sasha and I always go live on my YouTube channel, Darsh Shastlivi. This is the Alexander Demchenko panel. Sasha, our audience always asks for this. For you to say something optimistic at the end about the new special operations of the SBU, Malyuk, and the GUR. Please, Budanov, the floor is yours.
There will be special operations. Several phases are still ahead. These will be large-scale, major operations carried out by Ukrainian forces. Zelensky, Malyuk, and Budanov have broken free. Remember, after the last time, when there was a terrible strike on Kyiv, and by the way, on Odessa as well, there was Malyuk's special operation against the Pacific Fleet. Ukraine struck at the strategic bombers, struck at the Crimean Bridge. Expect another wave of large-scale operations soon. I don't know what will be burning. Will the mausoleum burn together with the Kremlin and Putin? Will the Baltic Fleet be burning? Will something else catch fire on the territory of the Russian Federation? Maybe Kaliningrad will go to hell. But I understand very clearly, Dasha, that there will be special operations. Malyuk, Zelensky, Budanov, they've all gone off the leash. And there will be retaliation. There's simply no other option here. Because Vladimir Putin, despite all his wishes, despite all his supposed attempts to talk to Trump, to negotiate some kind of talks, to show off, to hand over children, and so on, he has only one desire: to turn Ukraine into one big explosion, to create one big wasteland, to completely destroy all of Ukraine and Ukrainians, to carry out a massive purge. There is simply no other option here. It's either us or they will simply wipe us out. That's why there will be special operations. Military destruction, rear area destruction in Russia, so that the summer offensive chokes. This will happen in the near future. And the Black Swan will come to Putin and for Putin. Whether this beauty Vladimir Putin, Solovyov, and Trump like it or not,